Well, one of the reasons that the government's crucial ABCC legislation failed to get through the Senate last night, opening the path to the July election, is because the Turnbull team wouldn't countenance widening that construction industry watchdog into a broader national anti-corruption body. The Greens are spearheading the push. They're trying to make their case by focusing on government grants to a company called Brickworks. It's a generous Liberal Party donor, but the government says Brickworks' donations had no impact on its decision to give the company grants. Late today, Labor and the Greens used their numbers to force a Senate inquiry into political donations, and the influential Cabinet Secretary, Arthur Sinodinos, will be compelled to appear before it. Connor Duffy reports.
Morning, Mr. Abby. How are you? Morning, all. How are you feeling, sir?
Wonderful. For decades now, the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption has marched politicians and their camp followers on a walk of shame to its front door.
What's so funny? Do you regret the impact this has had on the Labor Party here?
The Greens and some crossbench senators want their federal colleagues to have the same scrutiny.
It's got to be all corruption, as I say, from the building and construction industry through to politicians, through to finance companies. It again would not cost the taxpayer any more money to broaden it.
Corruption pervades every part of society. Figures from overseas, figures from Australia show that corruption, fraud, misuse of public money is increasing every year.
There's no reason to think that the same sort of activity isn't occurring at a federal level. If you believe that the federal government and indeed that federal entities are immune from this sort of behaviour, I think you've got rocks in your head.
There being 34 ayes and 36 noes, the matter is resolved in the negative.
Last night, the crossbenchers voted down the government's proposed construction industry watchdog, sticking to their guns that it needed to be broadened to become a national ICAC.
We desperately need a national corruption and misconduct watchdog, and this bill, if broadened, would deliver this very outcome.
The Greens point to political donations as an area rich for potential inquiry.
Confirmed, 90 days.
Construction giant Brickworks is a company with close ties to Conservative politicians. So close it landed its CEO Lindsay Partridge and director Robert Webster at ICAC over revelations the company paid for a researcher in the office of former Premier Barry O'Farrell, and may have broken New South Wales law which bans donations from developers.
Today, the trail led to Liberal leader Tony Abbott's office and Brickworks, a generous developer donor.
The Liberal Party received 2 donations from Brickworks, totalling $250,000 on the eve of the 2013 election.
Tony Abbott. Alex Payne. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Brickworks provided Tony Abbott with a useful backdrop and ally for his campaign against the carbon tax. The company was dubbed Chicken Little for its dire predictions about the tax, but behind the scenes it was reaping millions of dollars in grants which it used to slash its power bill.
We know that they were the recipient of a significant grant, $17 million in total. We know that $14 million came at the behest of the Abbott government. We know that the money was approved by the then Abbott government.
Just after the election, when the government axed the tax, Brickworks' annual report showed that could have an unintended consequence. The company would miss out on $14 million worth of grants.
A further 3 projects totalling $14.6 million have been approved under the CTIP, but are yet to have contracts signed. With the change in federal government policy on carbon, it is unclear whether uncontracted projects under the CTIP will proceed.
The government had no obligation to proceed with the grants, but elected to pay them anyway.
We don't know whether what transpired was appropriate or indeed whether it was part of the huge problem we've got in the federal parliament, which is these donations that are often done for favours from political mates.
In 2014, when ICAC was investigating Brickworks as part of its inquiry into illegal donations, Operation Spicer, Greens leader Senator Milne asked the ICAC to look into the grants. ICAC replied that its hands were tied.
While the Commission's unable to pursue the matters that have been raised because the circumstances of the awarding of federal government grants and its funding are outside the Commission's jurisdiction. I thank you for the information provided.
There's no proof Brickworks got special treatment, but a grants consultant, Ben Cusack, says it was an unusual arrangement.
It's quite strange when a government acts as a program that it continues to fund applicants, or certainly recipients, after the program has closed. Normally a grant is tied to the income that comes into it, and certainly this one was tied to the carbon tax. So when the carbon tax stops coming in, then they have no further money to fund applicants.
Industry Minister Christopher Pyne says the government just signed off on a Labor approval.
Brickworks grant applications were treated in the same way as all other applications under the program.
In a statement, Brickworks says the money funded good projects initially approved under Labor. It decided not to access all the money available and received $3.9 million after the scheme had closed.
The grants were awarded on the basis that they delivered carbon abatement at a competitive rate. The projects were innovative and involved both energy-efficient plant and the substitution of fossil fuels by clean, renewable fuels.
Costings prepared by the Parliamentary Budget Office for the Greens show it would cost $47.5 million to establish a federal ICAC and run it across the budget forward estimates. That's roughly the same price as the government's Trade Union Royal Commission.
I think the Union Movement Royal Commission was certainly a one-off commission that was probably needed in that particular industry. I think better funds are spent looking at society across all levels, particularly the government, because it is involved in all industries, all sectors of the economy.
Neither the government nor Labor is supporting a federal ICAC, and the argument used against it is there is nothing for it to investigate.
There are already many agencies dealing with federal agencies dealing with corruption and criminal conduct, and it's a long list, as you know, beginning with the federal police. But whatever the merits of that, that is quite separate and distinct from the ABCC.
I think if it had been done in a private...
Robert Wild from the International Bar Association's Anti-Corruption Committee believes a model similar to Hong Kong's famous anti-corruption body with powers to prosecute is the way to go.
It investigates and it prosecutes, and that answers some of the criticisms directed to the New South Wales ICAC, because that only investigates and it shines a light into corruption, but then it's somebody else's problem to look at a prosecution, and that's often where nothing happens.